You are looking at two ingredients that cost less than $6 combined, and together they create a material that is harder, stronger, and faster curing than most $20 epoxy kits sold at any hardware store. One is sitting in your pantry right now, the other is in your junk drawer. And almost nobody knows what happens when you combine them, because the moment you pour superglue onto baking soda, you are not watching glue dry. You are watching a chemical reaction that the plastics industry has quietly used since the 1940s, and that hobbyists have been hiding inside model airplanes and RC cars for 50 years. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will never look at a bottle of superglue the same way again. Here is what most people think is happening when they use superglue. They think it is just sticky liquid that hardens when it touches air. That is not true, and the difference matters more than you would expect. Superglue, which is technically called cyanoacrylate, does not cure because of oxygen. It cures because of moisture. Every surface you touch, your skin, a piece of wood, a ceramic mug, carries a microscopic layer of water vapor on it, even when it looks completely dry. That trace moisture is what triggers the glue to harden. Without it, a bottle of pure cyanoacrylate could theoretically stay liquid in a sealed container for a very long time. The moment it senses even a faint trace of water, or more specifically, a faint trace of anything mildly alkaline, the individual molecules in that liquid begin linking together end to end, almost like dominoes falling in a chain, until the whole thing locks into a rigid solid. Chemists call this anionic polymerization. You do not need to remember that term. You just need to understand what it means. The glue is not drying, it is being triggered. And once you understand that it is a triggered reaction, not a drying process, the trick becomes obvious. If trace moisture on a normal surface triggers a slow cure over 15 or 20 seconds, what happens if you give the glue an enormous surface covered in something specifically designed to be mildly alkaline and slightly hygroscopic, meaning it naturally holds on to moisture? That is exactly what baking soda is. Sodium bicarbonate is a fine alkaline powder with a massive surface area because every single grain is a tiny crystal with edges and pockets that trap microscopic amounts of moisture from the air around it. When liquid cyanoacrylate hits a mound of baking soda, it is not touching one surface. It is touching millions of microscopic alkaline surfaces simultaneously, all of them slightly damp, all of them ready to kick off that chain reaction at once. The result is not a 15-second cure. It is closer to instantaneous, and it does not just happen on the surface. It happens all the way through the pile, because the glue is wicking down between the grains as it sets, locking each particle of powder into the hardening resin like rebar inside concrete. That last part is the piece almost nobody talks about, and it is the actual secret behind why this works so well. You are not just speeding up the cure, you are building a composite material. Cured superglue by itself is actually somewhat brittle. It can crack under stress, the same way a thin sheet of hard plastic can snap if you flex it too far. But baking soda particles trapped inside that cured resin act exactly like the fiberglass strands inside fiberglass resin, or the sand inside concrete. They reinforce it. They give the material something rigid to grip onto internally, which is why the finished result is not just hard, it is genuinely tough. It resists cracking under pressure. It can be drilled, it can be sanded smooth with regular sandpaper. It can even be tapped to hold a screw thread, something pure cured superglue alone could never do reliably. This is not a new discovery, even though almost nobody outside a few specific hobbyist communities has ever heard of it. Cyanoacrylate itself was discovered by accident in 1942 by a chemist named Harry Coover, who was working for Eastman Kodak trying to develop clear plastic for gun sights during the war. The compound he created turned out to be useless for that project because it stuck to absolutely everything it touched, including the lab equipment, including his hands. It was shelved as a failure. Years later, Coover rediscovered the same compound while testing materials for jet cockpit canopies, and this time he recognized what he actually had. By the 1960s, it was being sold commercially as Eastman 910, the direct ancestor of every tube of superglue on a shelf today. During the Vietnam War, military field medics carried aerosol versions of cyanoacrylate specifically because it could seal an open wound in seconds when there was no time for sutures, a fact that is documented in military medical archives and still referenced in modern emergency medicine discussions of skin adhesives. The baking soda trick itself comes from a completely different world, the world of radio-control airplane and car builders. Long before 3D printing existed, RC hobbyists were building lightweight frames out of balsa wood and foam, materials that needed to be strong but could not afford the weight of metal screws or thick epoxy joints. Builders in that community discovered, largely through trial and error passed down at hobby shop counters, that packing baking soda into a joint and soaking it in thin cyanoacrylate created a fillet stronger than the wood around it, cured in seconds instead of the 24 hours epoxy needed to set. They called it a kicker because the baking soda kicks the cure into overdrive. That technique has quietly lived inside RC modeling, custom knife making, and prop and costume building communities for decades, while the average person walks past both ingredients in the store every single week without any idea what they are capable of together. So here is exactly how you do this yourself, step by step, no special tools required. Start with a small mound of plain baking soda, the same box you already have for your refrigerator or your baking. Pour it onto a surface you do not mind getting a little messy. A piece of cardboard, a silicone mat, or a disposable plate works perfectly. Shape it into a small pile or pack it directly into whatever gap or crack you are trying to fill. If you are repairing something like a chipped corner on furniture, a crack in a plastic tool handle, a split in a wooden handle, or a gap in a knife scale, pack the baking soda directly into that gap first, pressing it in firmly with a toothpick or a flat tool so it fills the space completely. Once the baking soda is in place, take a bottle of thin, liquid cyanoacrylate, the kind sold in small plastic squeeze bottles, not the thick gel formula, because thin glue wicks through the powder far more effectively than gel does. Apply it directly onto the baking soda in small amounts, a few drops at a time rather than flooding it all at once. You will see it react almost immediately. The powder will whiten and stiffen on contact, and within a few seconds that section will be rock hard. If you are filling a larger gap or building up a thicker repair, apply this in thin layers, baking soda, then glue, then more baking soda, then more glue, building up the thickness gradually rather than trying to do it all in one pour. This layering approach is critical, and it is the single biggest difference between a clean, strong repair and a sloppy one that cracks later. The reason layering matters comes down to heat. This reaction is exothermic, meaning it releases heat as it happens, and that heat output scales with how much material reacts at once. A thin layer cures fast and stays comfortably warm. A thick pour all at once can get hot enough to feel uncomfortable against skin, and in extreme cases with a large volume of glue, it can even produce a faint wisp of smoke as excess uncured glue flashes off as vapor. This is not dangerous when you work in thin layers and in a ventilated space, but it is the exact mistake that catches people off guard the first time they try this, because nobody warns them that a tiny chemical reaction on their kitchen table can generate real noticeable heat. Once your repair or build is fully cured, which usually takes under a minute for thin layers, you are left with a surface that behaves almost nothing like ordinary hardened glue. You can sand it with regular sandpaper to shape it flush with the surrounding material. You can drill into it without it cracking apart, something that would shatter a piece of pure cured cyanoacrylate on its own. You can even thread a screw directly into a thick enough buildup of it, which is exactly why RC builders use it to reinforce screw mounting points in lightweight foam and balsa frames that could never hold a screw thread on their own. This is functionally the same principle dentists rely on when they use a powder and liquid combination to build up dental acrylic, and the same principle behind certain industrial gap fillers that cost far more than the ingredients sitting in your kitchen right now. The mistakes that ruin this technique are almost always about quantity and patience, not about the chemistry itself. The most common mistake is using too little glue, just enough to wet the surface of the baking soda without saturating all the way through. That leaves a hard shell on top with loose, uncured powder underneath, which will crumble the first time you put any real pressure on the repair. The fix is simple. Keep adding small amounts of glue until the entire mound stops absorbing it and starts to look glossy on the surface, which tells you the saturation has gone all the way through. The second mistake is trying to do a large repair in a single application, which leads to that excess heat and smoke we talked about, along with a rougher, more brittle final texture because the reaction happened too violently to bond cleanly. The fix is layering, the same way you would build up multiple thin coats of paint rather than one thick one. The third mistake, and this one catches almost everyone at least once, is forgetting that cyanoacrylate bonds skin just as fast and just as permanently as it bonds baking soda. Work over a disposable surface, keep a paper towel nearby, and resist the urge to touch the mound while it is actively curing, because your fingertip will become part of the repair whether you intended that or not. Now think about what this actually replaces. A small tube of 2-part epoxy putty at a hardware store runs somewhere between $8 and $15, and it needs 24 hours to fully cure before you can sand or drill it. A tube of JB Weld style metal filler runs similarly with a similar wait time. Dental-grade acrylic repair kits, the kind used for denture repairs, can run well over $20 for a small kit. What you just learned does the same structural job, in some cases a better job because of how deeply it penetrates and bonds, using a box of baking soda you already own and a bottle of superglue that costs a few dollars, with a cure time measured in seconds instead of a day. The chemistry industry did not invent a more advanced filler. They packaged 2 ingredients you already have access to, charged a premium for the packaging and the wait time, and counted on nobody connecting the dots between a kitchen staple and a tube of glue sitting 3 aisles away. The next time you are standing in the baking aisle holding a box of baking soda, you are going to see it differently. It is not just for your refrigerator, your teeth, or your science fair volcano. It is a reactive accelerant sitting on a shelf for under $2, capable of turning ordinary superglue into a moldable, sandable, drillable structural material strong enough to fix furniture, tools, knife handles, broken plastic housings, and a dozen other things you would have otherwise thrown away or paid someone else to repair. The knowledge has been sitting in hobby shops and dental offices for decades. Now it is sitting with you. If this saved you a trip to the hardware store, hit the like button, because that is what tells this video to reach the next person who has no idea their kitchen already contains half of a professional repair kit. And if you want to see the next everyday combination that quietly replaces something you have been overpaying for, the next video is exactly that. Take care, and I will see you in the next one.